The clock showed 11:30 p.m., and David was still standing at the giant metal sink in the back of Tony's Pizza Palace. His hands were bright red from the hot water, and his back hurt from bending over dirty plates all day. The dinner rush had been crazy tonight, and he was the last person still working in the kitchen. Water splashed everywhere as he scrubbed another heavy pot. The soap burned his cracked skin, but he kept going. This was his life now, washing dishes, mopping floors, and taking out trash. At 29 years old, this wasn't exactly what he had dreamed about as a kid. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was probably his wife Lisa texting him again about money. They were behind on rent, the car payment was due, and their electricity bill had a big red warning on it. David dried his hands on his dirty apron and checked the message. "When are you coming home? We need to talk." Those 4 words made his stomach drop. Nothing good ever started with, "We need to talk." David knew exactly what this was about. Lisa had been getting more and more angry about their situation. She worked as a waitress at a fancy restaurant downtown and made decent tips, but it wasn't enough to cover all their bills. David put his phone away and went back to washing dishes. The kitchen was quiet now except for the sound of running water and the hum of the big refrigerator. Even the dishwasher made more noise than he did. Nobody really noticed him back here in the corner. The other kitchen workers had gone home hours ago. There was Carlos, who cooked the pizzas and always smelled like cheese and pepperoni. Then there was Mike, who made the salads and breadsticks. They were nice enough guys, but they didn't really talk to David much. He was just the dishwasher. Even Tommy, the 19-year-old who bussed tables, seemed to have more respect around here than David did. At least Tommy got to talk to customers and sometimes got small tips. David was invisible. He worked in the back where nobody could see him, washing other people's messes. The worst part was when Lisa's friends came to pick her up from work. They would sit in the dining area of Tony's, laughing and talking about their lives. Their husbands were teachers, mechanics, office workers, regular jobs that people understood and respected. When they asked about David, Lisa would get quiet and change the subject. Last week, David had overheard Lisa talking to her sister on the phone. "I don't know what I was thinking when I married him," she said. "He has no ambition. He's happy, just washing dishes forever. My friends' husbands are building careers, buying houses, planning for the future. And what does my husband do? He cleans up after other people." Those words hit David harder than any punch could have. He loved Lisa. They had been together since high school, got married when they were 22, and he thought they would grow old together. But lately she looked at him differently, like she was embarrassed to be seen with him. David finished the last pot and started mopping the kitchen floor. The manager, Mr. Tony, had already gone home, but he always left a list of closing duties for David to finish. Sweep, mop, take out garbage, wipe down all surfaces, turn off lights. The same routine every single night. As he mopped, David thought about how he ended up here. He had actually been pretty good in school. Not the smartest kid, but he tried hard and got decent grades. After high school, he started community college and was studying business. He wanted to maybe run his own company someday, or at least work in an office where he could wear nice clothes and have a desk. But then his dad got sick, really sick. The medical bills started piling up, and his mom couldn't work because she had to take care of his dad. David had 2 younger brothers who were still in high school, and someone needed to help pay the bills. So he dropped out of college and got the first job he could find, washing dishes at Tony's Pizza Palace. That was supposed to be temporary, just until his dad got better and things got back to normal. But his dad never got better. He passed away 2 years ago, and the medical bills were still hanging over the family like a dark cloud. David kept working at Tony's because somebody had to pay them off. Now here he was, 7 years later, still in the same job. Still washing the same dishes, still invisible. David emptied the mop bucket and put everything away. He checked his watch, 12:15 a.m. Another 13-hour day finished. His feet hurt, his back ached, and he smelled like grease and dishwater. Tomorrow, he would do it all again. The drive home was quiet. Their apartment was in a rundown part of town where the rent was cheap, but the walls were thin and the neighbors were loud. David parked his beat-up Honda Civic next to a dumpster and climbed the stairs to the second floor. Lisa was waiting for him in the living room. She was still in her work uniform, a black dress and apron from the upscale restaurant where she worked. Even after a long shift, she looked put together. David felt dirty and tired next to her. "We need to talk," she said, not even looking up from her phone. David sat down on their old couch, still wearing his work clothes. The smell of dishwater and kitchen grease filled the small room. "I can't do this anymore, David," Lisa said. Her voice was flat, like she had practiced this speech. "I'm tired of living like this. I'm tired of being broke all the time. I'm tired of making excuses for why my husband washes dishes for a living." David felt his heart sink. He had known this conversation was coming, but hearing it still hurt. "Work hard," he said quietly. "I'm doing the best I can." "Are you?" Lisa snapped. "Because it doesn't look like it to me. You've been at the same dead-end job for 7 years. You make minimum wage. We live in this tiny apartment and can barely pay our bills. When was the last time we went out to dinner? When was the last time you bought me something nice?" David wanted to explain about his family, about the medical bills, about how he was just trying to keep everyone afloat. But Lisa had heard all of this before. "My friend Jessica's husband just got promoted to manager at the bank," Lisa continued. "They bought a house last month, a real house with a yard and a garage, and what do we have? Nothing, because you're satisfied with nothing." "I'm not satisfied," David said. I don't know what else to do." "That's the problem," Lisa said, standing up. "You don't even try. You just accept whatever life gives you and complain about it. Well, I'm not going to accept this anymore." She walked to the bedroom and came back with a suitcase. David's stomach dropped even further. "You're leaving?" he asked. "I'm going to stay with my sister for a while," Lisa said, not meeting his eyes. "I need time to think about what I want my life to look like, and write. Now this isn't it." David watched his wife of 7 years pack her clothes into the suitcase. Everything was happening so fast. This morning they were a married couple with money problems. Now she was walking out the door. "Lisa, please," David said. "We can figure this out. I can look for another job or maybe go back to school part-time." "You've been saying that for years," Lisa replied. "But you never actually do anything about it. You just keep washing dishes and complaining about being tired." She zipped up her suitcase and walked toward the door. "I'm sorry, David. I really am, but I can't waste my life waiting for you to become the man I thought I married." The door closed behind her with a soft click. David sat alone in the quiet apartment, still smelling like dishwater, still wearing his dirty work uniform. His wife was gone. His dreams were gone. Everything he thought he knew about his life had just walked out the door. He looked around the small apartment, the secondhand furniture, the bills stacked on the kitchen counter, the photos of him and Lisa from happier times. 7 years of marriage, and this is what it had come to. David finally stood up and walked to the bathroom. He looked at himself in the mirror, tired eyes, greasy hair, hands that were permanently stained from years of washing dishes. This was what Lisa saw when she looked at him. This was what everyone saw. But as David stared at his reflection, something began to change inside him. The hurt and embarrassment were still there, but underneath it all, a small flame of anger was starting to grow. Not anger at Lisa, she had every right to want more from life, but anger at himself for letting things get this bad. For 7 years, he had been invisible. For 7 years, he had accepted that washing dishes was all he was good for. For 7 years, he had let other people define what his life was worth. Standing there in his small bathroom at 1 a.m., smelling like grease and failure, David made a decision that would change everything. He was done being invisible. He was done being ashamed of who he was and what he did. Tomorrow he would still be washing dishes at Tony's Pizza Palace, but he would be watching everything else too. Learning, planning, getting ready to show the world and himself what he was really capable of. The dishwasher was about to disappear. What would take his place would surprise everyone. The next morning, David woke up on his couch with a sore neck and yesterday's work clothes still on. For a moment, he forgot that Lisa was gone. Then he saw the empty coffee mug she always left by the sink, and reality hit him like a cold splash of water. But instead of feeling sorry for himself, David felt something different. That small flame of determination from last night was still burning. He showered, put on clean clothes, and did something he had never done before. He arrived at Tony's Pizza Palace 2 hours early. The restaurant was empty except for Carlos, who was prepping vegetables for the lunch rush. Carlos looked surprised to see David so early. "Hey man, what are you doing here?" Carlos asked, looking up from a pile of onions. "Your shift doesn't start until noon." "I know," David said. "I just wanted to get a head start on things." But that wasn't the real reason David was there early. He wanted to watch. For 7 years he had been stuck in the back corner washing dishes, never really seeing how the whole restaurant worked. Today, that was going to change. David started his usual routine with the dishes from the night before, but he kept his eyes and ears open. He watched Carlos slice vegetables with incredible speed and skill. The man could chop an onion in 30 seconds without even looking at his hands. "Carlos," David called out, "how did you learn to do that so fast?" Carlos looked surprised that David was talking to him. They had worked together for 3 years, but David usually kept to himself. "Practice, man. Lots and lots of practice. When I first started cooking, I was slow as a turtle, but I kept practicing at home, watching videos, on YouTube, asking other cooks for tips. Now I can prep all the vegetables for lunch in less than an hour." David nodded and went back to his dishes, but his mind was racing. Carlos had learned skills that made him valuable. That made him irreplaceable. What skills did David have? What made him valuable? When the lunch rush started, David found himself watching everything. He noticed that Tony, the owner, was always stressed during busy times. The man was running around trying to take orders, manage the kitchen, and handle money all at the same time. David saw that Mike, who made salads, sometimes ran out of ingredients in the middle of the rush because he didn't prepare enough beforehand. He watched the delivery driver Jake get frustrated because orders weren't ready when he arrived to pick them up. During his break, instead of sitting in the back room scrolling through his phone like usual, David walked around the restaurant. He paid attention to things he had never noticed before. The cash register was old and slow. Customers got impatient waiting for Tony to ring up their orders. The menu board above the counter was faded and hard to read. Some of the light bulbs were burned out, making the dining area look dim and uninviting. David also noticed the customers. A group of construction workers came in every Tuesday around 1 p.m. They always ordered the same thing, 3 large pizzas and a bunch of sodas. But they had to wait 15 minutes every time because nobody was ready for them. There was an elderly lady who came in every Friday for a small pizza and a salad. She always asked for extra dressing on the side, but the kitchen staff would forget and put it on the salad. Then they would have to make a new one, wasting time and ingredients. David started keeping mental notes about all these little problems. At night, when he got home to his empty apartment, he would write them down in an old notebook he found in a drawer. After a week of watching and listening, David decided to take a risk. During a quiet moment between lunch and dinner, he approached Tony, who was sitting at a corner table, going through receipts and looking stressed. "Hey, Tony," David said, his heart beating fast. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Tony looked up, surprised. In 3 years, David had maybe said 10 words to him total. "Sure, what's up?" Tony said, but he kept looking at his papers. David took a deep breath. "I've been watching how things work around here, and I noticed some stuff that might help make things run smoother." Now Tony looked up with full attention. "What kind of stuff?" "Well, those construction guys who come in every Tuesday, they always order the same thing. What if we had their order ready when they walked in? We could start making their pizzas at 12:45, and they'd be ready by 1 p.m. when they arrive." Tony raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "And that lady who comes in on Fridays, she always wants extra dressing on the side. What if we just wrote that on her? Regular order so the kitchen remembers?" David pulled out his notebook and showed Tony the list he had been making. "I wrote down some other things too. Like, we throw away a lot of vegetables because Mike makes too much salad mix and it goes bad. But if he made smaller batches twice a day instead of one big batch, we'd waste less." Tony was quiet for a long moment. looking through David's notebook. Finally, he said, "These are actually pretty good ideas. How long have you been thinking about this stuff?" "Just the past couple weeks," David admitted. "I never really paid attention before, but now I'm trying to understand how everything works together." "Why now?" Tony asked. "What changed?" David hesitated. He didn't want to get into his personal problems. "I just realized I want to do more than wash dishes. I want to learn the business." Tony closed the notebook and handed it back to David. "Tell you what, try out a few of these ideas and see if they work. If they do, we'll talk about maybe expanding your role around here." David's heart jumped. This was more than he had hoped. For the next week, David put his ideas into action. He convinced Mike to make smaller batches of salad throughout the day instead of one huge batch in the morning. Food waste went down immediately. He talked to Carlos about having the construction workers' pizzas ready before they arrived. The guys were so happy with the quick service that they started coming in 3 times a week instead of just once. David also started paying attention to the money side of things. He noticed that Tony always looked stressed when he was doing the books at the end of each day. During a quiet moment, David asked if he could help with simple tasks like counting inventory or organizing receipts. "You know how to do this stuff?" Tony asked, looking surprised. "I took some business classes in community college," David said. "I never finished my degree, but I remember the basics." Tony handed David a stack of receipts. "Sort these by date and add up the daily totals. Let's see what you can do." David worked on the receipts during his breaks and after his shift. He was careful and thorough, double-checking every number. When he handed the organized paperwork back to Tony, the owner was impressed. "This would have taken me 3 hours," Tony said. "You did it in 1 hour and it's perfect." Word about David's ideas started getting around the restaurant. Carlos began asking for his opinion on kitchen efficiency. Mike started talking to him about inventory management. Even Jake, the delivery driver, mentioned that orders were running smoother lately. But the biggest change was in David himself. For the first time in years, he felt like he had a purpose beyond just washing dishes. He was solving problems, making improvements, and people were starting to notice him. 3 months after Lisa left, Tony called David into his office after the dinner rush. "Sit down," Tony said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "We need to talk." David's stomach fluttered. Was he in trouble? Had he overstepped somehow? "Your ideas have been working," Tony said. "Food waste is down 20%. Customer complaints are down. We're serving people faster and they're happier. The construction crew is telling their friends about us, and we've got new customers because of it." David tried not to smile too big, but he was proud of what he had accomplished. "I want to offer you a new position," Tony continued. "Assistant manager. You'd still help with dishes during busy times, but your main job would be helping me run this place. It comes with a raise, $15 an hour instead of minimum wage." David's eyes widened. $15 an hour was more money than he had ever made in his life. "There's one condition," Tony said. "You need to learn everything about running a restaurant. Food costs, scheduling, supplier relationships, customer service, health department regulations, all of it. Are you willing to do that?" "Yes," David said without hesitation. "Absolutely yes," Tony smiled. "Good. We start Monday. And David, I'm glad you decided to speak up. A lot of people see problems but never say anything. It takes guts to try to make things better." That night, David sat in his apartment writing in his notebook. But instead of problems, he was writing goals. Learn food cost calculations, understand scheduling, build relationships with suppliers, master customer service. For the first time since Lisa left, David felt hopeful about his future. He was still a dishwasher, but he was also becoming something more. He was becoming someone who solved problems, who made things better, who people relied on. The invisible man was starting to become visible. And this was just the beginning. 2 years had passed since David became assistant manager at Tony's Pizza Palace. He had learned everything Tony promised to teach him and more. David could calculate food costs in his head, create work schedules that kept everyone happy, and handle difficult customers with a smile. But late at night, when the restaurant was closed and David was alone with his thoughts, he felt something stirring inside him, a hunger for something bigger, something that belonged to him. He had been saving every extra dollar from his assistant manager's salary. His apartment was still small and simple, but now it was by choice, not necessity. David lived like a monk, spending money only on basics while every other penny went into his savings account. One evening, while Tony was reviewing the monthly profits, David couldn't help but notice the numbers. Tony's Pizza Palace was making good money, but David could see dozens of ways to make it even better. More efficient kitchen layout, better ingredient sourcing, expanded menu options that would bring in new customers. "Tony," David said during a quiet moment, "what would you think about opening a second location?" Tony laughed. "Kid, I can barely handle this one place. You think I want double the headaches?" But David had been thinking about this for months. What if someone else ran the second location? Someone who knew your system and your recipes? Tony looked at David with new interest. "You thinking about leaving me?" "Not leaving," David said carefully. "Partnering. I've got some money saved up, and I've learned everything about running a restaurant from you. What if we opened a smaller place together? I'd manage the day-to-day operations. You'd get a percentage of the profits." Tony was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "Let me think about it." But 3 weeks later, Tony came to David with bad news. "My wife thinks it's too risky. She doesn't want to put our money into a second restaurant right now." "I'm sorry, kid." David was disappointed but not defeated. That night, he sat at his kitchen table with his notebook and his savings account statement. He had $28,000 saved up. Not enough to open a full restaurant like Tony's, but maybe enough for something smaller. David started driving around town during his days off, looking at empty storefronts and for rent signs. Most places were too big or too expensive. But one afternoon he found something interesting. It was a tiny space in a strip mall sandwiched between a laundromat and a cell phone repair shop. The previous tenant had been a sandwich shop that went out of business. The space was only 800 square feet, but the rent was cheap, and it already had basic restaurant equipment. David called the landlord and arranged to see the inside. The space was smaller than his apartment, but he could picture it working. A simple counter, a few tables, an open kitchen where customers could watch their food being made. That night, David created a business plan. Not a fancy one with graphs and charts, but a simple, realistic plan written in his notebook. He would serve fresh, made-to-order Mexican food, the recipes his grandmother had taught him as a kid. Tacos, burritos, quesadillas. Nothing complicated, but everything made with quality ingredients and care. He calculated startup costs, monthly expenses, and projected sales. The numbers were tight, but they worked. If he could serve just 50 customers a day at an average of $8 per order, he could pay his bills and make a small profit. Getting a loan was harder than David expected. 3 banks turned him down. They saw a guy who had been washing dishes for most of his adult life and didn't believe he could run his own business. The 4th bank was different. The loan officer, Mrs. Rodriguez, listened to David's whole story. She asked tough questions about his business plan, but she also seemed impressed by his detailed preparation and his experience at Tony's. "I'm going to take a chance on you," she said finally. "But the loan is small, and if you miss even one payment, we'll have to shut you down. Can you handle that pressure?" "Yes, ma'am," David said. "I've been handling pressure my whole life." With his savings and a small business loan, David had enough money to open his restaurant. He decided to call it Abuela's Kitchen, grandmother's kitchen, after the woman who taught him to cook. The next few months were the hardest of David's life. He worked his regular shifts at Tony's during the day, then spent his evenings getting his own place ready. He painted walls, fixed equipment, and learned about health department permits and business licenses. Tony was supportive, even though he was losing his best assistant manager. "You're doing something brave," he told David. "Most people just dream about owning their own business. You're actually doing it." David hired only 2 people initially: Rosa, an older woman who could help with cooking, and Ben, a teenager who would work the register and clean tables. David couldn't afford to pay them much, but he promised that if the restaurant succeeded, They would get raises and profit bonuses. The week before opening, David barely slept. He was terrified. What if nobody came? What if the food was terrible? What if he had made a huge mistake and lost everything? Opening day was a disaster. The cash register broke down twice. Rosa burned the first batch of rice. Ben spilled salsa all over a customer's shirt. Only 12 people came in all day, and David lost money on every single order because he was still learning how to control portions and costs. But David didn't give up. The second day was slightly better. The third day, a little better than that. By the end of the first week, word was starting to spread that there was a new Mexican place in the strip mall with really good food and friendly service. David's breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A food blogger named Jessica who wrote about local restaurants decided to try Abuela's Kitchen. David didn't know who she was when she walked in, but he treated her the same way he treated every customer, with complete attention and care. Jessica ordered 3 different items to try. David personally prepared each one, explaining the ingredients and cooking methods. When she mentioned she was trying to eat healthier, David suggested modifications and prepared a special version of her burrito with extra vegetables and less cheese. Her review was posted online 3 days later. Abuela's Kitchen is a hidden gem, she wrote. The owner, David, clearly cares about every single customer. The food is authentic, fresh, and made with love. This tiny restaurant serves food that tastes like it came from someone's grandmother's kitchen. The review brought a flood of new customers. David went from serving 50 people a day to serving over 100. He had to expand his hours and hire 2 more employees just to keep up with demand. But success brought new challenges. David was working 18-hour days, trying to manage the kitchen, handle suppliers, train employees, and keep customers happy. He was making more money than ever before, but he was exhausted. One evening, while David was closing up alone after a particularly busy day, someone knocked on the door. David looked up to see Lisa, his ex-wife, standing outside. David unlocked the door, not sure what to expect. "Hi, David," Lisa said, looking around the small restaurant. "I heard about your place. I wanted to see it for myself." "What do you think?" David asked, genuinely curious about her opinion. Lisa looked around at the clean, simple dining room, the open kitchen, the satisfied customers who were finishing their meals. "It's really nice," she said. "I'm proud of you." They talked for a few minutes about the restaurant and David's success. Lisa seemed different, less angry, more respectful. "I was wrong about you," she said as she prepared to leave. "I thought you had no ambition, but I was looking for the wrong kind of ambition. You were building something real while I was just complaining." After Lisa left, David sat alone in his restaurant, looking around at what he had built. 6 months ago, this had been an empty storefront. Now it was a thriving business that employed 5 people and served hundreds of customers every week. But David wasn't satisfied yet. He had bigger dreams now. Abuela's Kitchen was just the beginning. He wanted to open more locations, hire more people, maybe even franchise the concept to other entrepreneurs who had dreams like his. As David turned off the lights and locked up for the night, he thought about the dishwasher he used to be. That man had been invisible, forgotten, looked down upon. But that same man had been watching, learning, and preparing for this moment without even knowing it. The skills he learned washing dishes, attention to detail, hard work, persistence, were the same skills that made him successful as a restaurant owner. The humiliation he felt had motivated him to prove everyone wrong, including himself. David drove home that night knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges. Running a successful restaurant was harder than washing dishes, but it was also more rewarding than anything he had ever done. He was no longer invisible. He was no longer just getting by. He was building something that mattered, something that was his. And this was still just the beginning of his story. 5 years after opening Abuela's Kitchen, David stood in his corporate office looking out at a view he never could have imagined. 43 floors below, the city bustled with life, and somewhere in that maze of streets were 87 restaurants that bore his name. David Rodriguez Restaurant Group had become one of the fastest-growing food companies in the country. What started as a tiny 800-square-foot restaurant in a strip mall had grown into an empire worth over $900 million. David himself was now worth more than he ever dreamed possible when he was washing dishes at Tony's Pizza Palace. But the journey to get here hadn't been easy or straightforward. After Abuela's Kitchen became successful, David had opened a second location, then a third. Each restaurant followed the same formula: fresh ingredients, simple recipes, excellent service, and fair prices. But David quickly learned that managing multiple locations was completely different from running one restaurant. The fourth location almost bankrupted him. David had gotten overconfident and opened it in an expensive part of town without properly understanding the local market. The rent was too high, the customers expected fancier food than David's simple menu, and within 6 months, he was losing thousands of dollars every week. David had two choices: close the failing restaurant and cut his losses, or figure out how to make it work. He chose to fight. Instead of giving up on the location, David completely changed his approach. He studied the neighborhood, talked to potential customers, and redesigned the menu to match what people actually wanted. He added healthier options, created a lunch special for busy office workers, and started catering to local businesses. It took 8 months, but the fourth location finally became profitable. More importantly, David learned a crucial lesson about adapting to different markets, while maintaining his core values. That lesson became the foundation for his expansion strategy. Instead of opening identical restaurants everywhere, David created different concepts for different neighborhoods. Abuela's Kitchen remained his flagship brand for family dining, but he also developed Abuela's Express for busy lunch crowds, Abuela's catering for corporate events, and even Abuela's Frozen for grocery stores. By year 7, David had 22 locations across 3 states. He employed over 400 people, many of whom had started as dishwashers, servers, or cooks and worked their way up to management positions. David made it a company policy that 80% of management positions would be filled from within. The growth attracted attention from investors. Private equity firms and restaurant chains started approaching David with offers to buy his company or partner with him for rapid expansion. The biggest offer came from a huge corporation that owned several restaurant chains. They wanted to buy David out completely for $200 million. It was more money than David had ever imagined having. But during the negotiations, David realized something important. The corporate executives saw his restaurants as just another business to optimize and scale. They talked about cutting labor costs, using cheaper ingredients, and standardizing everything to maximize profits. "We can have 500 locations within 3 years," the lead executive told David during a presentation. "Imagine the efficiency we could create with centralized food preparation and automated systems." David listened politely, but inside he felt sick. These people wanted to turn his restaurants into fast food factories. They didn't understand that the heart of his success was treating employees well and serving real food made by real people. He turned down the $200 million offer. Instead, David chose a different path. He found investors who shared his values and wanted to grow the business without losing its soul. Together, they created an expansion plan that prioritized quality over speed. David also started the Abuela's Foundation, using a portion of his profits to provide business loans and mentoring to other entrepreneurs from working-class backgrounds. The foundation had helped over 300 people start their own small businesses, from food trucks to catering companies to neighborhood restaurants. "I remember what it felt like to be turned down by banks," David told a group of foundation scholarship recipients. "Everyone deserves a chance to build something, regardless of where they come from or what job they currently have." The foundation's success stories were David's proudest achievement. There was Miguel, a former janitor who now owned 3 successful food trucks. There was Patricia, a single mother who had worked as a hotel housekeeper and now ran a thriving catering business. And there was Kevin, a former dishwasher just like David, who had opened his own soul food restaurant and was already planning a second location. David's personal life had also changed dramatically. 3 years ago, he had met Anna, a teacher who volunteered at the foundation's business workshops. She didn't care about his money or success. What attracted her to David was his kindness, his work ethic, and his commitment to helping others. They had gotten married in a simple ceremony at the original Abuela's kitchen location. Instead of an expensive honeymoon, they had spent 2 weeks visiting David's restaurants and meeting with foundation scholarship recipients. Anna was now pregnant with their first child, and David couldn't wait to be a father. He had already decided that his child would grow up understanding the value of hard work and treating everyone with respect, regardless of their job or social status. Last month, David had received a phone call that brought his journey full circle. Tony's Pizza Palace was struggling, and Tony was thinking about closing down. The old man who had given David his first real chance was asking for help. Without hesitation, David bought Tony's Pizza Palace and made Tony a partner. They renovated the restaurant while keeping its character, improved the systems David had helped create years ago, and turned it back into a profitable business. "You saved my restaurant," Tony told David during the reopening celebration. "You saved my life first," David replied. "You taught me that everyone has potential if someone just gives them a chance." Standing in his office now, David looked at a framed photo on his desk. It wasn't a picture of him receiving some business award or shaking hands with famous people. It was a photo of him at Tony's Pizza Palace 7 years ago, wearing his dishwasher apron and smiling at the camera. Anna had found it in an old box and insisted on framing it. "Never forget where you came from," she had said when she put it on his desk. David's phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. "The reporter from Business Magazine is here for your interview." This was the interview David had been both excited and nervous about. Business Magazine was doing a cover story about his rise from dishwasher to restaurant empire owner. The story would reach millions of people. As David walked to the conference room to meet the reporter, he thought about what message he wanted to share. Not just the success story, but the real lessons he had learned. The reporter, a woman named Jennifer, had done her research. She asked detailed questions about David's business strategy, his expansion plans, and his management philosophy. But the question that mattered most came at the end. "What would you say to someone who's in the position you were in 10 years ago?" Jennifer asked. "Someone who feels invisible, stuck in a job they think doesn't matter?" David was quiet for a moment, thinking about all the dishwashers, janitors, retail workers, and other people in jobs that society often overlooks. "I would tell them that there is no such thing as a small job," David said finally. "Every job teaches you something if you pay attention. Every job has dignity if you bring dignity to it. And every person has the potential to build something amazing if they're willing to work for it and never give up on themselves." He paused, thinking about his own journey. "When I was washing dishes, I thought I was invisible. I thought nobody saw me or cared about what I did. But I was wrong. I was learning skills I didn't even know I was learning. I was building character. I was getting ready for opportunities I couldn't even imagine yet. The dishwasher job didn't make me small," David continued. "It made me strong. It taught me to work hard, pay attention to details, and treat every task with respect. Those same skills helped me build this company." After the interview, David drove to the original Abuela's Kitchen location. It was still his favorite restaurant in the entire chain. He liked to stop by unannounced, help in the kitchen, and talk with employees. Tonight, he found Rosa, his first employee, training a new dishwasher, a young man named Alex who looked nervous and overwhelmed. "Don't worry," David heard Rosa telling Alex. "Everyone starts somewhere. I've seen dishwashers become managers, cooks become franchise owners, and servers start their own restaurants. If you work hard and keep learning, there's no limit to where you can go." David smiled and walked over to introduce himself to Alex. "Hi, I'm David," he said, extending his hand. "I used to wash dishes too." Alex looked confused until Rosa whispered something in his ear. Then his eyes got wide. "You're the owner?" Alex asked. "I am now," David said. "But I'll always be a dishwasher first. That's where I learned everything that really matters." As David drove home that evening, he thought about how much had changed since the night Lisa walked out of his apartment. He had proven that being a dishwasher wasn't something to be ashamed of. It was something to be proud of. Tomorrow, David would continue building his business empire. But tonight he was just grateful to be the man who had learned that every job has honor, every person has worth, and every dream is possible if you're willing to work for it. The invisible dishwasher had become impossible to ignore, and his story was inspiring thousands of others to believe in their own possibilities.